Have you ever felt like you were wasting your energy just by speaking? Like every conversation left you more drained than heard, more exposed than understood? In a world that praises noise and constant expression, few realize this truth. Sometimes, the more you talk, the more invisible you become. And that's not an accident. That's a system designed to disconnect you from your essence. But what if I told you that silence, the very thing you've been avoiding, is the key to your real power? See, we live in an era of performance. Everyone's trying to prove something, justify, defend, explain. But beneath all that noise, something ancient is calling, a deeper rhythm, a sacred stillness that lives in the center of your being. This is where real transformation begins, not in what you say, but in what you learn to hold. Silence isn't weakness. It's a mystical force, a lost language of the universe. And today, we're going to explore how one man, Niccolò Machiavelli, discovered the immense power of silence, not in theory but in suffering, exile, and rebirth. If you've ever felt disconnected from your voice, from your intuition, from your place in the world, this message is for you, because what you'll hear in the next few minutes could change how you see yourself forever. This is not about manipulation, it's about mastery, not about ego, but about soul. Through the lens of Machiavelli's journey, we'll uncover the forgotten spiritual wisdom hidden behind the art of silence, and how you can use it to reclaim your energy, command presence, and realign with your purpose. Most people never realize how much they reveal when they speak, but once you understand the sacred mechanics behind stillness, everything shifts. This is your invitation to stop giving yourself away in fragments and start embodying the power that comes from within. This is spirituality in motion. Silence as revolution, stillness as strategy, presence as your highest form of influence. And before we begin, a quick reminder. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet. If this content speaks to something deep inside you, if it resonates with that quiet part of you that's been waiting to be seen, hit subscribe now. Join this growing community of seekers and awakeners, because what we're about to uncover might just change your inner universe. In the heart of Renaissance Florence, where ambition danced in candlelit halls and betrayal whispered behind velvet curtains, Niccolò Machiavelli moved like a shadow between kings and chaos. He wasn't merely a thinker observing from the periphery, he was immersed in the blood and breath of politics. As a diplomat and strategist, he saw power in its rawest form, seductive, ruthless, and ever-changing. But what transformed him wasn't the applause of princes or the touch of influence. No, it was silence, the kind that descends after disgrace, after torture, after exile. Stripped of title, relevance, and protection, Machiavelli found himself alone, with only the universe, the pulse of his thoughts, and an inner voice too long ignored. That's when the real journey began. In that void, in the empty spaces no longer filled by flattery or command, he encountered something sacred. Not religion, not tradition, but spirituality, pure and unfiltered, the kind born from suffering and rebirth. The silence became a mirror, and in it, Machiavelli saw not only the world, but himself, fragmented, disillusioned, but awakening. That sacred stillness revealed patterns, the rise and fall of men, the illusions of virtue, the power of perception, and with each observation came a deeper insight, not into politics, but into human nature, into the mystical architecture of influence, fear, and silence. It was in that sacred space that the prince emerged, not just as a book, but as a coded manuscript for those brave enough to read between the lines. People often misunderstand the prince, reducing it to a manual for manipulation. But beneath the tactical tone lies a deeper current, a current that flows towards self-mastery. You see, silence is not merely a political tool, it's a spiritual weapon, a protection for the soul, a compass through the chaos of the external world. Machiavelli's retreat from public life wasn't a failure, it was an initiation. Like the archetype of the hermit, he withdrew not to hide, but to see more clearly. The universe often speaks loudest when the world stops talking, and for those who listen, symbols begin to align, dreams become messages, and inner conflict reveals its origin story. His downfall became his doorway, the torture chamber, the prison cell, the exile. They were thresholds, rites of passage into the hidden layers of consciousness. It's the same path many of us walk without knowing, the collapse that invites awakening, the silence that precedes the inner voice. And through that descent, he grasped an eternal truth, that the unseen governs the seen. That power is not seized through noise, but through presence. The quiet kind of presence that alters the atmosphere of a room without saying a word. That's the essence of real spirituality. To be rooted in the self, while chaos rages outside. To hear the universe inside, even when the world rejects you. So what is the lesson for us, the seekers, the wanderers of meaning, in a world addicted to volume? It is this: the fall is not the end. It is the beginning of vision. When we lose the noise, we gain the symbols. And Machiavelli's silence, heavy, painful, transformative, offers more than any speech ever could. It teaches us that power is not about being seen, but about seeing. Not about commanding attention, but commanding awareness. And in that space between what is said and what is understood lies the mystical key to sovereignty. As this truth settles, another layer begins to emerge from the silence. Silence isn't weakness. It never was. In truth, silence is one of the most underestimated forms of power. It's the moment before the lightning strikes, the stillness before a wave crashes. Machiavelli in his solitude and study came to see this. He knew that noise was the realm of the desperate, those who hadn't yet learned to command presence with absence. To remain quiet while the world demands sound is not passivity, it is precision, strategy cloaked in stillness. The wise throughout time have always known this. Silence isn't about saying nothing, it's about choosing exactly when and why to speak, guided by the deeper rhythms of the universe. To walk in silence is to move through the world with intent. It's not the absence of words, but the cultivation of inner alignment. While others fill space to avoid discomfort, the one who has embraced spirituality understands that silence is fertile ground. It is in silence that ideas crystallize, intuition sharpens, and deeper truths rise to the surface. Machiavelli saw firsthand how leaders who spoke too quickly exposed too much. But those who waited, who watched, who listened, often held the real influence. They didn't seek attention. They became attention itself. In the mystical fabric of power, silence threads invisibly through every moment of consequence. There's something disarming about a silent presence. It creates unease. People don't know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you'll do next. This unpredictability is a shield. It's a form of psychological warfare that doesn't require confrontation, only patience. Machiavelli understood that not speaking is often more powerful than speaking well, because silence, when intentional, suggests control, discipline, depth. The universe respects those who don't scatter their energy, and so do people. You become enigmatic, and in being enigmatic you shift the power dynamic, no longer reacting but shaping. So when life tests you, when you're challenged, provoked, cornered, remember this: silence isn't surrender. It's a pause before the strike, a breath before the breakthrough. Machiavelli didn't teach silence as retreat. He revealed it as mastery. Not everyone will understand this. Most will feel compelled to react. But the one who walks the mystical path learns to wait, to listen, to let others unravel while they remain centered. This stillness becomes an anchor in a storm, a compass in the fog. Over time, the universe begins to respond to this discipline, not with noise but with synchronicity. Life rearranges itself to match the inner vibration of clarity. And in that alignment, spirituality is no longer an idea, it's an embodied state. And as silence roots itself deeper within, a new realization begins to whisper its way into consciousness. Every word you speak leaves a trace, like footprints on sacred ground. Most people don't see it, but each sentence you release carries energy, intention, and vulnerability. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He saw how the loudest ones in the room were often the most exposed. To speak without awareness is to give your power away without a fight. Not all truths are meant to be spoken aloud. Some are meant to be guarded, held close like ancient scrolls of wisdom. In spirituality, this is a known truth. Sacred things lose their essence when overexposed. The universe speaks in whispers, not in noise, and so should we. People tend to speak just to fill space, but what they're really trying to fill is the void within. Silence feels threatening when we haven't made peace with our own thoughts. So we talk, we explain, we overshare. But this compulsive need to be understood often betrays our deepest insecurities. Jung would call this the cry of the unintegrated self, the parts of us that haven't yet faced the shadow. The more you speak without intention, the more you reveal your inner architecture, and not everyone deserves access to your blueprint. In the mystical path, guarding your energy includes guarding your voice. Words are spells, and like all magic, they must be used with precision. When you speak impulsively, you cast spells you can't take back. You promise things you don't mean. You reveal wounds that were still healing. The wise speak like alchemists. They know that every phrase alters the field around them. Machiavelli saw this on the battlefield of politics, but the same law applies in daily life. The more you speak, the more data you give others to control the narrative about you. Silence, on the other hand, lets the universe shape the story in your favor. You're not hiding. You're aligning with the sacred rhythm of timing. Speaking too much also diminishes the weight of your words. When you constantly talk, people stop listening. Your energy gets diluted. But when you speak rarely, with purpose, the room listens. That's not manipulation, it's spiritual economy. It's knowing that your voice is an extension of your inner power. On the spirituality journey, speech becomes ceremony. It's not about impressing, it's about imprinting. And to imprint, with truth, you must first withdraw into the inner temple. There in silence you remember who you are. Then and only then should your words emerge, like a blade drawn only when necessary. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, to overtalk, to defend your position, pause. Ask yourself, who am I speaking for? Is it my ego that wants validation, or is it my soul that needs stillness? Most of what you want others to understand, they won't. And that's okay, because your energy speaks louder than your voice. Let the mystery do the work. Let the universe echo your silence in ways that words never could. As you step deeper into this awareness, the path narrows, but it also clears, and somewhere just beyond that curve, a deeper silence awaits. Silence, when used with intent, becomes more than absence. It becomes a force, not passive, but piercing. Machiavelli knew this. He saw how silence shifted power in subtle, almost invisible ways. In confrontations, silence doesn't just hold back, it disorients. When people expect resistance and receive none, their rhythm falters. It's the psychological equivalent of removing gravity for just a second. The mind, desperate for structure, starts projecting. And in that gap, you gain control, not through dominance but through presence. True spirituality teaches us that the deepest forces don't shout, they hum beneath the surface. Silence is that hum. When you remain quiet during a conflict, you hold a mirror. People begin to see themselves reflected in the emptiness of your response. Their assumptions unravel, their narratives crack, because silence forces them to confront what they've been avoiding, their own voice echoing back at them. This is the mystical edge of silence. It doesn't just protect you, it reveals them. It's an alchemical reversal. Suddenly the one who says less knows more, and the one who spoke too much feels naked under the weight of your stillness. This is not avoidance. It's energetic. Intelligence. The universe responds to restraint with revelation. Think of ancient temples hidden deep within mountains or buried beneath earth. Their silence doesn't weaken their meaning. It amplifies it. You enter them quietly, reverently, because silence demands respect. In the same way, when you enter a space without rushing to prove yourself, you shift the vibration. You create gravity. You disrupt expectations. This is spiritual Aikido, redirecting energy without resistance. When Machiavelli chose not to respond, not to defend, he didn't surrender. He observed, he listened, and in that listening, the universe showed him the deeper game, one that words could never win. But silence also protects. It shields your inner sanctum from contamination. Not everyone deserves access to your truth. Not every moment is sacred enough to hold your vulnerability. In a world obsessed with expression, withholding becomes rebellion, a sacred boundary, a spell of protection. In spirituality, boundaries are not walls, they are filters. And silence is one of the strongest filters there is. It keeps you from giving your energy to chaos. It allows you to hold your frequency while the noise tries to pull you in. Silence isn't absence. It's containment. It is the sacred vessel that holds the essence until it's ready to be poured. So the next time you're pulled into conflict, consider staying silent, not out of fear, but out of power. Watch how others reveal themselves. Watch how the universe begins to shift in your favor. The one who controls the silence controls the tempo, and the one who controls the tempo controls the outcome. In that sacred quiet, you are protected. You are disorienting without aggression. You are seen without being exposed. And just as the dust begins to settle, a new dimension of presence begins to rise, a deeper stillness waiting to be explored. Not all silence is the same. Some is circumstantial, some is cultivated, and some is sacred. Machiavelli intuitively grasped this spectrum, even if he never named it outright. There are levels to silence, each deeper than the last, like layers of consciousness, like dimensions of the soul. At the surface, we find tactical silence, brief, intentional pauses in specific moments, in meetings, in arguments, in negotiations. Here, silence buys time. It forces others to reveal their hand. It creates space to breathe, to reassess. But it's just the beginning. A single tactic in a much wider game, orchestrated by the universe itself. The second level is strategic silence. This isn't momentary. It's a sustained posture, a curated reputation. You become known as someone who listens more than speaks, someone whose words carry weight because they are rare. In politics, this builds mystique. In leadership, it builds trust. And in life, it creates magnetism. Strategic silence shapes the energy around you. It makes others lean in. It's the art of making your silence louder than their noise. It's a power cultivated through practice, through restraint, through deep connection to one's inner self. This is where spirituality begins to inform behavior. Silence becomes lifestyle, not reaction. But the third level, that's where silence becomes sacred. Existential silence. It's not about others anymore. It's not even about tactics. It's about essence. At this level, silence is a portal, a gateway into the unconscious, into the self, into the symbolic landscape of the soul. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole. This kind of silence is part of that path. It's the quiet that rises in meditation, in dreams, in nature. It's not empty. It's pregnant with truth. This silence connects you to the deeper rhythms of the universe. And in that communion, words lose urgency. You begin to feel rather than explain, to know rather than prove. In the mystical traditions, this level of silence was always revered. Hermits, monks, sages. They didn't withdraw from speech because they had nothing to say, but because they had touched something too vast for language. They became guardians of silence, not prisoners of it. And in their stillness, the world came to them. Their presence radiated answers that words never could. This is the silence of the cosmos, the breath between heartbeats, the void from which all creation emerges. It doesn't suppress you. It expands you. It doesn't isolate you. It reconnects you to everything. It is, in truth, the highest form of spirituality. So which level are you living in? Are you silencing yourself out of fear or out of mastery? Are you holding your tongue as a defense or as a channel of higher awareness? The path through silence is not linear. You may move between the levels, rising and descending with the tides of your own evolution. But the deeper you go, the more the universe reveals. In the stillness, you'll begin to see patterns, symbols, signs, and eventually, you'll discover that silence wasn't an absence after all. It was a doorway. And on the other side of that door, a new kind of voice begins to speak. Perception is power, and silence, when mastered, becomes the sculptor of that perception. People project onto silence because the mind hates a vacuum. It needs to assign meaning to fill in the gaps, and when you give it no answers, it creates its own story about you. Suddenly, you're not just quiet, you're mysterious, wise, powerful. This is not manipulation, it's resonance. You're letting others see their own reflection in your stillness. Machiavelli understood this subtle alchemy. He didn't need to speak to be heard. His silence said everything. In the realm of spirituality, this is energy at work. unspoken, yet deeply felt. Humans are wired to notice contrast. In a room full of chatter, the one who says nothing stands out, not because they're invisible, but because they carry a different frequency, a stillness, a pause that bends time. In this space, mystical perception begins. People feel you rather than analyze you. They become curious, sometimes intimidated. Silence becomes presence, and presence becomes power. In spirituality, presence is sacred. It's what heals, what attracts, what shifts the energy of a space without effort. When you embody silence with awareness, you don't have to seek influence. It seeks you. There's also a psychological advantage. When others don't know what you're thinking, they begin to reveal themselves. They speak more. They reach. They react. And in that exposure, you gain understanding, while giving nothing in return. This is the strategy hidden within mystical silence. It disarms without confrontation. It reveals without interrogation. People fear what they can't read, but they also respect it. They begin to treat your silence like a riddle, and in the process they elevate your position, giving you power you never asked for, simply because you didn't rush to explain yourself. But beyond the psychological, there's something more subtle, something cosmic. When you stop trying to be understood, you create space for the universe to speak through you. Your energy becomes less fragmented, more magnetic. You start to walk differently, enter rooms differently. Your silence becomes a field, an aura charged with intention. Others feel this before you even speak, and it's in that energetic field that true transformation happens. People begin to align to your stillness. They lower their volume. They listen, not because you demanded it, but because your spirituality made it inevitable. So remember, silence isn't emptiness. It's narrative in shadow. It's presence in its purest form. It's the echo of depth that can't be rushed. And when used with awareness, it becomes your armor, your language, your magnetism. Let others speak to be seen. You speak when the moment becomes sacred. Because when you master silence, the world starts to hear you in ways words could never achieve. And just as that realization settles, another layer of discipline begins to unfold before you. Silence isn't something you stumble into. It's something you cultivate, a skill, a discipline, a daily act of presence in a world that demands noise. And like all sacred practices, it begins with resistance. The mind resists. The ego screams. You feel the pull to explain, to justify, to comment. But the path of spirituality teaches that true strength lies in conscious restraint. Not repression, but refined intention. Developing silence isn't about muting yourself. It's about learning to speak from alignment, not reaction. It's about realizing that not everything you feel needs to become sound. In the beginning, silence feels unnatural. You'll notice your impulses, how quickly you want to fill a pause, break the tension, defend your worth. That discomfort is the doorway. The tension is the teacher. Because silence is not passive, it's active awareness. It's holding space. It's watching your emotions rise like waves without letting them crash into words. This is the initiation into mystical communication, a type of listening that hears beyond what is said, a type of speech that begins within. In that space, you stop reacting to the world and begin responding from the soul. Self-control is not suppression. It's sovereignty. It's knowing when to act, when to speak, and when to wait. The greatest communicators are not those who say the most. They are the ones who say the least, with the greatest impact. Machiavelli knew that. His words were chosen, deliberate, sharp. But before they were spoken, they were studied, inside. That inner refinement is what gave them power. In spirituality, this is the essence of inner alchemy, turning the lead of impulsiveness into the gold of conscious presence. And this transformation doesn't happen once. It happens daily, breath by breath, word by word. Over time, this practice changes how you move through the world. You begin to feel when a moment is asking for silence instead of speech. You sense when your energy is being wasted on explanation. You realize that your peace is worth more than being understood. And slowly, something sacred begins to take root. Inner authority. You stop needing permission to be quiet. You stop apologizing for not engaging. Because you've realized that your silence is not absence, it's protection. It's a container for wisdom, a space where the universe can whisper without interference. So ask yourself, are you speaking from fear or from presence? Are your words a reaction or a ritual? Developing silence is not about becoming voiceless. It's about becoming intentional, powerful, free, because in the end, every time you choose not to speak impulsively, you reclaim a piece of your energy, you gather it, refine it, guard it, and eventually you become someone whose very stillness speaks volumes, someone who doesn't need to be loud to be heard. And just beyond that threshold of mastery comes the challenge of living it in real time. Wisdom means nothing if it stays in theory. Silence as a spiritual and strategic force must be lived, not just admired. And so we come to the practice, the test, the initiation. For those ready to walk the path, not just read about it, I offer this, a simple challenge with profound consequences. For the next 3 days before every important interaction, pause. Don't rush to speak. Don't rush to explain. Set a clear intention. Ask yourself, what is the purpose of this conversation? What outcome serves both truth and inner peace? That's where spirituality meets strategy, when silence becomes a conscious bridge to alignment. This challenge isn't about staying mute. It's about speaking only when your words are in service to clarity, not emotion. You'll notice how often we speak to relieve discomfort, to win approval, to avoid awkwardness. But silence teaches you to sit with those edges, to breathe through them. During these 3 days, observe what happens when you say less, when you let the other speak first, when you respond slowly with presence. You'll begin to feel it, a shift in the atmosphere, a quiet power rising. That's the mystical nature of restraint. It shapes reality from the inside out. What you'll also notice is this. People reveal more when you reveal less. They fill the silence. They expose their logic, their emotions, their uncertainty. You become the mirror, not the echo. And in that reflection, you start to see with new eyes. You hear the universe in the cadence of their speech, in what they avoid, in the pauses. That's when you realize silence isn't just strategic, it's sacred. It gives space for the unseen to surface. It gives room for intuition to speak, for presence to lead. It's no longer just about control. It's about connection, deep, energetic connection. The challenge may feel strange at first. You'll feel the urge to break the silence, to explain yourself. That's normal. It means the old habits are unraveling. Let them. Let yourself witness the discomfort without reacting. Let the silence stretch. And when you do speak, let it be slow. Let it be intentional. Speak as if your words are carrying a vibration into the fabric of reality, because they are. This is spirituality in motion. This is mastery in practice. Not in grand gestures, but in subtle moments. Everyday interactions become sacred rituals of observation, restraint, and depth. By the end of the 3 days, something will have shifted. Not just in how others see you, but in how you feel within. Yourself, quieter, stronger, clearer. You'll begin to crave that stillness, not as escape, but as alignment. You'll trust your presence more than your performance. And that's the real gift, to move through the world with the authority of silence, to speak only when the soul speaks first, to live as a vessel of calm in a noisy world. This is where the path of mystical silence leads, not to emptiness, but to power, not to withdrawal, but to presence. And now your next chapter begins. So, what does silence reveal about you? Now that you've seen how silence can be your greatest ally, your mirror, your shield, your doorway, take a moment and ask yourself, where in your life are you giving too much away just by speaking? Share your reflections in the comments. Which part of this journey spoke loudest to your soul? If this message resonated with you, stirred something deep, or brought clarity to your path, then stay with us. This is just one layer of a much greater unfolding. What we explore here is not content, it's transformation. This is how true spirituality begins, not with noise, but with awareness. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next revelation. Each new video brings another key to the hidden architecture of your inner universe. The next step on your path is waiting. Watch the video that's about to appear here on your screen. It continues this mystical exploration and will show you how the universe uses chaos as a symbolic tool to awaken your higher self. See you there. Celestial Truths.